The Supreme Court of the United States is unlike any other place in Washington, D.C. It doesn't need flashing lights or armed guards to show its power. It has something stronger. Silence. Not just quiet, a sacred engineered silence. The kind that doesn't just ask you to whisper, it commands you. From the moment you step through the tall oak doors, your heartbeat starts sounding louder than your thoughts. The marble floor is too clean, too cold. It reflects everything: your shoes, your posture, your nerves. Look up and you'll see the ceiling curved like the inside of a dome in a forgotten cathedral. It was built not just to carry sound, but to carry reverence. Every inch of this room is designed to remind you, you are not the center here. Power is. Lining the walls are portraits of past justices painted in oil, preserved in gold. Almost all of them white, all of them men. Most are expressionless. Some look downright stern, but together they send a clear message. You are being watched by tradition. There are no microphones on the benches, no nameplates with blinking lights. This is not a place for conversation. It is a place for listening, for observing, for falling in line. Even the chairs speak. They creak just a little when someone shifts their weight, like they're embarrassed to make a sound in such a holy space. This is not a courtroom. It's a monument, not just to law, but to hierarchy. And the unspoken rule of this room, those who belong already know they do. And those who don't, well, they're reminded with every cold stare, every whisper that dies in the air, every security glance that lingers just a second too long. For over 234 years, this room has heard the voices of senators, justices, presidents, and lawyers. But rarely, if ever, has it heard the voice of a black woman who refuses to sit quietly. That was about to change. Because today, Jasmine Crockett didn't just walk into a courtroom. She walked into history with her voice, her presence, and her refusal to let tradition silence truth. She didn't walk in like she was lost. She walked in like she knew exactly how many people hoped she wouldn't show up. Jasmine Crockett, 43 years old, freshman, congresswoman from Texas, former civil rights attorney. Sharp suit, sharp eyes, and sharper still her awareness. She didn't belong here, at least not in their eyes. Not in this place built for voices that echo like sermons and faces that blend into portraits. As she crossed the gallery floor, heels clicking against the marble, conversations dimmed. Security glanced longer than usual. A clerk whispered to another, eyebrows raised. Someone coughed as if to fill the space her presence created. She didn't flinch, because she had spent her entire life walking into rooms that weren't built for her. And every time she did, she learned how to carry herself so the room would have to adjust. She saw the justices seated at the bench, men in robes seated in judgment over law and lives. And among them, Justice Clarence Thomas. His stare didn't linger, but it didn't need to. The message was already clear. You're not supposed to be here. You're not one of us. You're here to watch, not to speak. But Crockett had no intention of being quiet, because she wasn't just here for herself. She was here for every voice that had been told this space is not yours. She took her seat, calm, ready. But even in stillness, her posture said everything. She was not silent, and she was not sorry. The hearing had barely begun. Just a few opening statements, a few procedural notes, and then Justice Clarence Thomas leaned into his microphone. He doesn't speak often, but when he does, it's not by accident. It's by design. His voice was low, measured, too calm to be called angry, too sharp to be mistaken for neutral. Some people, he began, his eyes fixed ahead, need to learn to respect the traditions that built this institution. He didn't name anyone. He didn't have to. The words sliced through the air like a slow-moving blade, heavy with intention. Across the chamber, every head turned. Some flinched, others froze. The camera zoomed in tight shots on faces that had just seconds ago been relaxed. Now they were tense, eyes narrowed, jaws clenched. In the congressional observation section, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink, but her hands slowly tightened around the edge of her folder. That shot was meant for her. Not subtle, not clever, deliberate, and everyone knew it. This wasn't just a remark. This was a warning, a message wrapped in formality. Know your place, sit quietly, don't challenge what you don't belong to. But Clarence Thomas had just made one miscalculation. He assumed Jasmine Crockett would take the hit and stay seated. He had no idea what was coming. The room waited. Not for a ruling, not for a witness, but for Jasmine Crockett to stay quiet. That was the unspoken expectation, that she would nod politely, lower her eyes, absorb the insult like so many had before her, then smile through it for the cameras. Because that's how it's always worked in rooms like this. Be gracious. Don't make a scene. Respect the institution even when it disrespects you. The trap was baited, and for a moment it looked like she might take it. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink. But her face said everything. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She was calm, controlled, surgical, and behind her eyes was a message sharp enough to cut granite. I've heard this my entire life. But today I speak. Around her, aides shifted in their seats. Staffers exchanged glances. Someone in the back began typing furiously, already sensing a moment was forming. Justice Thomas looked back down at his notes. He thought it was over. He thought wrong. It was barely audible at first. Just a scrape, a slow, deliberate shift of wood on marble. But in that courtroom where silence is sacred, it sounded like a shot fired through stained glass. Jasmine Crockett was standing. Her chair slid back just a few inches, but it was enough to break centuries of unspoken rules. You could hear it in the way the air changed, in the way people stopped breathing, in the way the clerks froze mid-sentence, in the way even the marble seemed to echo. No one speaks from the gallery. No one stands without permission. No one dares to challenge from that side of the room. But she wasn't no one. And this wasn't just a challenge. It was a line being crossed, a silence being broken, not with shouting, but with presence. Justice Thomas looked up. The moment their eyes locked, the courtroom was no longer a courtroom. It was a battlefield, and the sound of that chair, it was the first cannon. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She didn't yell. She didn't perform. She didn't flinch. Instead, Jasmine Crockett spoke the way lawyers are trained to speak when the room is stacked against them. Low, controlled, unshakable. With all due respect, she began, voice firm but steady. I cannot sit here while you use this bench to question my right to exist in this space. Gasps, actual audible gasps, from senators, from aides, from journalists who had seen everything until now. It wasn't just what she said, it was where she said it, and who she was saying it to. You do not challenge a Supreme Court justice from the gallery. You do not accuse a man in robes of weaponizing tradition. You do not say the words, my right to exist, unless you mean them with your entire being. But Jasmine Crockett didn't come here to please. She came here to speak for herself, for the people who never got a seat in that chamber, and for the millions who watched from the outside, wondering if anyone would ever dare to say it out loud. With all due respect, she said it once, but the echo would last for years. It was like a still frame, a moment suspended in the thick, breathless air of a room not used to being challenged. No one moved, no one dared. The courtroom, designed to intimidate, now looked stunned, as if it had been slapped across the face. The cameras cut fast. Wide angle, Justice Thomas frozen. Eyes narrowed, lips parted mid-thought, but no words came out. Close up, a clerk's pen stopped mid-sentence, held just above the paper ink drying in midair. Pan left. A senator's hand gripping the edge of the bench just a little too tight, knuckles white, another shot aide whispering, but the sound feels swallowed. No one can hear anything because no one's breathing. Even the walls seemed to pause, centuries of silence now listening to something real. It felt like watching history lean forward, like the entire building was waiting to see what would happen next. This wasn't noise. This wasn't political theater. This was the kind of stillness that only happens right before the explosion. And then she did the unthinkable. Jasmine Crockett reached into her blazer and pulled out her phone. A sharp gasp swept across the chamber. That sound, the collective shock of tradition being broken in real time. Phones were not allowed, not in this room, not in front of the bench. But this wasn't just a phone, it was a weapon. And she was about to fire. She didn't scream. She didn't point. She didn't flinch. She looked straight at Justice Clarence Thomas and began to read. $267,000, her voice rang clear, deliberate. In unreported gifts from political donors. Silence. Luxury yacht trips. Private jet rides. Real estate deals involving your mother's house. And on January 6th, your wife texting the White House Chief of Staff. Now it wasn't just silence. It was crackling tension. No one had ever spoken these words here. Not in this hall, not in front of him, not like this. And the phone in her hand, it wasn't glowing for drama. It was glowing with receipts. Every line she read documented, every detail verifiable, every scandal real. She didn't just bring her voice into that courtroom. She brought the truth and the record to prove it. She didn't pause to let the silence recover. She used it like oxygen to a flame. Jasmine Crockett looked up from her phone, voice unwavering, gaze locked onto the bench. "You want to talk about respect?" she asked, not as a question, but as a challenge. The greatest disrespect to this institution is a Supreme Court justice taking bribes and calling them gifts. The words dropped like bricks, heavy, final, and suddenly the silence didn't feel holy anymore. It felt exposed, uncomfortable, true. For years, that courtroom had demanded reverence. But now it felt like the marble itself was ashamed. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Because Jasmine hadn't just broken protocol. She had broken the illusion. The illusion that power always means dignity. The illusion that robes always mean righteousness. The illusion that silence equals respect. What she said couldn't be unspoken, and what the room now felt couldn't be undone. This was never just a courtroom, and this was never just a disagreement. This was a collision between two Americas. On one side, Justice Clarence Thomas, a man shaped by the old order. He doesn't shout, he doesn't tweet. He believes in robes, rituals, and rooms that stay quiet when power enters. To him, respect is earned through silence, and tradition is sacred, not to be questioned, not even gently. On the other side, Representative Jasmine Crockett. She's not here to preserve the room. She's here to ask who gets to sit in it. She doesn't whisper. She doesn't wait. And she doesn't accept that respect should be granted just because someone holds a title. For Thomas, the past is the guide. For Crockett, the past is the warning. He represents those who built the house. She represents those who were never invited in. And now they are both standing in the same room, but speaking two very different languages. One speaks in tradition, the other speaks in truth. In the country, it's listening to both, trying to decide which voice feels like the future. You could feel the shift. It didn't come with noise, not at first. It started in the front row. A man in his 80s, black, dignified, wearing a faded judicial pin on his lapel. A retired judge. He had seen courtrooms rise and fall, had watched injustice wear the mask of procedure for decades. And now, for the first time in his long legal life, he let the tears fall. No words. Just truth streaming down his cheeks. 3 rows back, a law student, young, sharp, exhausted from pulling an all-nighter to be here, stood up. Hands clapped once, then again, then more. Not out of disrespect, but because something finally felt right. The gallery, once still, once silent, was no longer observing. It was witnessing, not law as theory, but justice in motion. A place meant to contain emotion had now become a place that demanded it. It wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a battleground. For ethics, for truth, for who gets to be heard. It took just 43 seconds and the world ignited. A shaky cell phone clip shot from the back of the chamber caught the moment Jasmine Crockett stood up, looked Justice Thomas in the eye, and spoke what no one else dared to say. It hit Twitter like lightning. TikTok lit up within the hour. Major outlets scrambled: CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all running different angles, but all running it. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett confronts Justice Clarence Thomas in historic outburst. A courtroom moment the Supreme Court won't forget. Courage or chaos. The viral clip splitting America. The hashtags exploded. Shout justice, says Jasmine. Hashtag truth in the court. Not your silent witness. Shadow, who owns the bench? Within 24 hours, commentators were calling it the most important moment of judicial accountability in decades. Think pieces poured in. Panels debated ethics, race power, and the future of the court. And in the middle of it all, a single voice, not shaking, not retreating, but rising. What started as a hearing was now a national reckoning. The halls of Congress hadn't heard this kind of noise in years. Democrats poured into press briefings, praising Jasmine Crockett as the conscience this country forgot it needed. A voice for the unheard, the unseen, the uninvited. Progressive leaders held her hand like she was Rosa Parks reborn. They didn't just support her, they stood behind her like a firewall. But the backlash came just as fast. Conservative senators called her a disgrace, a reckless agitator. She didn't expose injustice. One GOP rep sneered she just violated the decorum of the court. Cable news went into full spin cycle. Was Jasmine Crockett a truth teller or a threat to the institution? One question echoed louder than the rest: is she a hero or the beginning of the end? The Capitol didn't just erupt. It split between those who saw her as the future and those who feared she might end the past. By now, the hashtags had become background noise. The clips had been viewed 47 million times. The panels debated endlessly. But in living rooms, barbershops, classrooms, churches, a different kind of question was rising. Not did Jasmine Crockett break the rules, but who do those rules really serve? Because beneath all the legal jargon, beneath the procedures, the hearings, the decorum, something raw had broken through. People weren't asking what's the precedent. They were asking what's the truth. Not is she lawful, but is she legitimate? Because legitimacy isn't written in the Constitution. It's felt in the gut. It's seen in who we believe when the microphones go silent. It's measured not by robes or titles, but by courage in the moment that counts. And right now, across America, from college campuses to kitchen tables, one question echoed louder than any headline. Does she speak for us? He didn't say a word, not a single syllable, not a cough, not a cleared throat. Justice Clarence Thomas sat motionless, his fingers no longer drumming the desk, his usual stare now blank, unfocused. For years, his silence had commanded the room. Today, it betrayed him. And then she moved. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't storm out. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stood, gathered her papers, turned toward the exit and walked, head high, back straight, steps deliberate. The sound of clapping started soft, a few hands, then a few more. Then the whole damn chamber. Some clapped in awe, some in defiance, some in apology, and those who once called her a disruption now watched her like they'd seen a statue come to life. Thomas still hadn't moved. Jasmine didn't look back. She didn't have to. They told her to respect tradition. They meant sit down, stay quiet, don't question the men in robes. But Jasmine Crockett didn't come to echo silence. She came to redefine the room. Because tradition, real tradition, isn't about marble walls or gold-framed portraits. It isn't about rules written by those who never imagined you would walk through the door. It's about this telling the truth even when you weren't invited to speak. Standing up even when the floor was never meant for you. Being heard even when power pretends it's deaf. What Jasmine did wasn't an attack on tradition. It was a reminder. That tradition means nothing if it protects power and silences justice. And it means everything when it makes room for the truth. She didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for the nurse too tired to march, for the grandmother who's seen it all and is still waiting for change, for the janitor who's never been called sir, and the student who's always told they don't belong. She spoke for the ones who've been told to wait, to be patient, to sit down. And she didn't whisper. She thundered, I will not be silent. And through her, millions were finally heard. So now the question isn't about her, it's about you. When the time comes when the room falls quiet and eyes turn to you, will you rise? In a world where power often hides behind silence and tradition becomes an excuse for injustice, true courage means speaking up when it's easier to stay quiet. Jasmine Crockett reminded us that you don't need permission to defend the truth. You just need conviction. And sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one that refuses to sit down. Let this be your reminder. Never let anyone's title silence your truth. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think, made you feel, and made you want to speak up too, then subscribe now to our channel. Because the truth needs voices like yours. Don't just watch history happen, stand with those who dare to shape it.